Captain Thomas Tingey, commander of the Washington Navy Yard, had a choice. He knew the British were marching toward Washington, and he was under strict orders to keep his ships and supplies out of British hands. Should he burn the Navy Yard? In the distance, Tingey saw the Eastern Branch Bridge as it was blown up by American sailors in an attempt to keep the British out of the city. A clerk named Mordecai Booth volunteered to scout out the British location. He was to warn Tingey if they were headed for the Navy Yard. The Navy Yard housed the Navy's top assets, including 2 warships, the 74-gun frigate Columbia and the new sloop of war Argus, that were almost complete. There were also 3 barges, 2 75-foot boats, and 1 50-foot vessel. The yard also housed sails, ropes, and lumber for shipbuilding. Captain Tingey waited for word from Mordecai Booth around 8 p.m. The British were in the city. Tingey and his men lit fuses leading to the ships and the buildings full of supplies. The best stock facility in the country went up in flames. The British entered Washington, and a glow from the southwest signaled the destruction of the Washington Navy Yard. The first fire of the night was set by American forces.
And the fireball is just immense. And that was probably the biggest thing that everybody on the countryside could see that night. They didn't want to do it, but they saw no other way out. There was nothing else they could do. They couldn't defend their position. They had to leave. He was in a no-win scenario. If he would have allowed the British to take that, he would have been crucified. If he burned it, he would be crucified, but at least the British didn't have it.
The assets burned at the Navy Yard were an enormous investment for the Navy. Captain Tingey knew what a loss it would be, but he also knew he could not let the ships and supplies fall into British hands. The Columbia was so valuable to the Navy, Tingey had an impossible choice to make. He had very limited time and information in which to make a decision. Strategically, however, losing the frigate to the British would have been disastrous.
The British are at Bladensburg. They've just, with not a whole lot of effort, defeated the Americans who have fled, and their way is open to get into Washington from the northeast. So the British actually, they rest for a little while because there's nothing to stop them. There's no rush. They rest after that battle. And then in the evening, they march into Washington. And most of the city is deserted. Women and children have left. And the British actually have ordered their troops, you're not to harm civilians. We are going after government buildings. We are not trying to kill people. We're not trying to harm people. That's not their goal here. And really their goal is to humiliate the Americans by burning their government buildings. And this is partially in retaliation, particularly for the burning of the Canadian city of York, but also some other acts in Canada.
So the city of Washington is in panic mode. They're so scared of the British. What they don't know is that the British are not going to touch the civilian population, but they don't know that, so they're running.
British Rear Admiral Sir George Cockburn and Major General Robert Ross entered Washington about 8 p.m. They led their men toward the Capitol. Still under construction, the building was at the center of the young city. British soldiers and Royal Marines entered the Capitol. They piled up anything that would burn and set fires throughout the building. The Library of Congress and Supreme Court chambers were all gutted, but the building remained standing. Ross, Cockburn, and their troops then marched to the President's house, a mile down Pennsylvania Avenue. The soldiers gorged themselves on the feast Dolly Madison had left on the table that night. They collected a few souvenirs and burned the president's mansion.
So the British troops sit down and they eat that food, they party a little, and then they burn down the White House at around 11 o'clock. And then they move on throughout the middle of the night to burning down some other government buildings, places that are housing like the War Department, the Treasury, the State Department. Luckily, most of those records have been removed from those places, but they're really burning down the most prominent public buildings in the city. And fortunately for the Americans, by that afternoon on the 24th, or the next day on the 25th, a big storm comes in and the rain and wind put out the fires. So, in fact, things would have been worse if not for that act of nature.
Despite all of the destruction caused by the British, the flames at the Navy Yard were the brightest in the sky that night.
They weren't going to mess with civilian stuff, but anything that was government or public domain, they were going to go after, and they would have gone to the Navy Yard. They also might have scuttled the ship or burned it as well. Either way, in the end, the Essex or the Columbia, whatever you want to call it, that frigate was going to go down, and everything at the Navy Yard was going to go down, whether by flame or by being taken away. But it was going to go without question. And I think he did absolutely the only thing he could do.
The land where the Navy Yard was located was purchased in 1798 and transferred to the Navy the next year. It was built under the supervision of the yard's first commandant, Commodore Thomas Tingey. He stayed at his post for 29 years. The Navy Yard was important during the War of 1812 as a support facility and as a vital strategic link for the defense of Washington. The Navy Yard never regained its prominent position as a shipbuilding site after the war.